In the deep dark void that is YouTube, there are brilliant, beautiful, glowing orbs of scale modeling beauty. Masterful artworks brought to us by the likes of Plasmo and Night Shift. If you have been scouring the dark recesses of this cavernous social media dystopia, looking for such a masterpiece and landed here, you are in the wrong place. Hello fellow hobby nerds! Today I am going to share my experience building this. The P-47D Thunderbolt Bubbletop in 1/72nd scale from Hasegawa. The overall quality of the plastic is Hasegawa standard. Not too hard, not too soft, sands well, glues well, shows details well. It's that nice Hasegawa gray, so it is easy to see the mold lines and details. In spite of the tooling being 50 years old, the flash that was present was mostly on the trees with almost no flash on any of the parts. The only real exception being the canopy. More on that later. Also, in spite of its age, the quality of the detail is remarkably impressive. The kit is relatively inexpensive, coming in at about $15. Now, as I mentioned, the tooling is 50 years old. As a result, the build process is challenging, especially when compared to modern kits. There is very little in the way of positive placement indicators to ensure parts are properly placed and aligned. For instance, the instrument panel just has a small lip on the upper interior of the fuselage, but little else to keep it properly centered and square. The canopy just sits on the top of the fuselage. Seating it correctly is a bit of a challenge, especially if you've already masked it off and can't see how it's lining up with the cockpit. The main landing gear has a loose-fitting keyed post. Good luck getting the alignment right on those. Now, on the subject of landing gear, the doors for the landing gear have a pretty clever design. They come molded in a fully closed position, and if you want to pose the aircraft with the landing gear down, you have to cut the different sections of the doors up to attach to either the landing gear struts or the fuselage. Now, the cutting locations are very clearly marked, so it's easy to do. Now, unfortunately, both sets of landing gear doors suffer from the aforementioned lack of positive placement. So getting them glued into place and properly aligned on the fuselage is a bit of a chore, especially if you're a dunce like me and pose the rear ones incorrectly. The interior. There ain't one. The instrument panel is a decal on a flat piece of plastic. The seat is a seat and not at all accurate. You also get a thoroughly nondescript pilot figure to put in said seat, which you will definitely want to do just to fill the giant space that is the cockpit of a P-47. And that's it. There are no flight controls, no equipment, nada. The canopy comes molded closed, but the seam separating the canopy sections is fairly obvious, so if you wanted to pose it open, cutting it should be doable. But given the complete lack of an interior, I'm not sure why you'd want to. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the clear sprue was the one location where there was some significant flash on the parts. In order to get a good fit to the fuselage, I would recommend you test fit it before even attempting any cleanup. That flash may actually help you get a good fit. My own exuberance when cleaning up the canopy probably didn't help much when it came to fitting it. I may have overdone it. Now, if you are going to go with the box art markings, don't bother with the yellow striping decals. I did, and I'm telling you, just don't do it. Just paint them. Now, for me, the carrier film seemed to be incredibly reflective. So when I was trying to place it down right up against those panel lines, the light kept hitting the edge of the carrier film, making it really hard to see what I was doing, so I was constantly fighting to get that perfect angle. And on the subject of carrier film, you will definitely need some kind of decal softening product. Seriously, these things have more silver than the king. Now, one specific problem to be on the look for related to decals is with the underside yellow striping decals. You know, the ones I told you not to use? Well, the carrier film on those actually covers the space for the pylon, which is molded on. So if you ignore my advice and use these decals, definitely make sure to trim that hole out so it'll slide over it. Now lastly, the National Star insignia is not fully opaque. So on the wing, the yellow stripe is visible through the insignia where it overlaps. Now I know I mentioned earlier that the plastic was a good thing. It is. But in this particular box, one of the wings was warped. Now, combining that with the complete lack of an interior and a lot of other inaccuracies, I kind of lost all enthusiasm for the build. Now, on the subject of the build, I should point out that most, if not all, of the issues with the finished product are entirely my fault. Since I lost interest before I even got started. I kind of flew through the build. Okay, I bulldozed through the build. I completely skipped planning, preparation, proper research. And this is from a guy whose second favorite hobby is collecting reference books for building models. So, yeah, there are gaps, glue seams. I glued the rear landing gear doors in the wrong position because I didn't bother checking my references beforehand. I fixed it later, but it didn't really matter because I snapped one of them off when I was placing decals. I have no idea where it went. I didn't bother sealing off the cockpit, which meant debris got in there. So now, when I turn it upside down, I have a P-47 snow globe. Yay! I should also point out that there is a plume of clear plastic located front and center of the canopy. Wasn't there before I started, no idea what happened. I didn't bother breaking out the airbrush for most of this, just the two main colors of the fuselage and nothing else. I did everything else with a brush. I also didn't bother testing the color for the fuselage before I sprayed it, which is why it looks like mashed peas. Now, having said that, I did discover the AK 3rd Gen acrylic near equivalents for Tamiya's cockpit green and a yellow primer for the interior cavities. So this could be helpful for touching up the standard Tamiya paints on a future project. So I got a little grumpy and a lot lazy with this build, and I don't really care. But in a vain attempt to turn this into something positive, I have decided to ruin it further by experimenting with some weathering tools and techniques that I've never used before. That's why you don't see any panel lining on it at this point. And I expect that experiment will be just a tip in the future. After that, it's probably going in the bin. So, if you want to build a 1/72nd P-47, you should probably choose a different kit. Like one of these, which I absolutely, totally plan on building. I promise. Do I have a Sturmovik?